They were once the electrifying voices that defined generations: Mick Jagger, Steve Perry, Robert Plant, and Lou Gramm. Icons of rock whose voices soared through stadiums and whose presence lit up the world stage. But time has a way of softening even the loudest legends. Today, their lives are marked by loss, illness, isolation, and the weight of past glory. While the music remains immortal, the men behind it now face the harsh truths of aging, battles with health, strained relationships, and a world that's moved on from their prime. This isn't just a story about fading fame, it's a look into how life, even for the greatest, can take a tragic turn. These are the silent struggles behind the spotlight, echoes of greatness, met with the quiet pain of the present. The spotlight has always been brightest on Mick Jagger. From the moment he swaggered onto the stage with the Rolling Stones, he wasn't just a frontman. He was a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of rebellion, sexuality, and rock and roll excess. His pout, his sneer, and his electrifying moves made him a god of the counterculture era. For decades, fans saw the moves, the lips, the scandals, and the music that shaped generations. But behind the dazzling spectacle, the screaming crowds, and the platinum records lies a story laced with tragedy, heartbreak, and the crushing emotional cost of being a living legend. This is the story of a man who conquered the world, but, in many ways, lost pieces of himself along the way. A life where artistic triumphs are forever entangled with personal sorrow. Mick Jagger's rise to superstardom was as swift as it was seismic. By the mid-1960s, the Rolling Stones were not only one of the biggest bands in the world, but the embodiment of a cultural revolution. Their bad boy image set them apart from the squeaky-clean Beatles, and Jagger, with his magnetic stage presence and provocative dance moves, was the face of it all. Yet even as the band reveled in their growing success, cracks appeared beneath the surface. The pressure to constantly outdo themselves creatively while fending off scandals, battling addiction, and navigating the dangerous waters of fame took its toll on the band, and on Jagger personally. In 1969, tragedy struck the band when founding member Brian Jones, who had become increasingly isolated due to his drug use and erratic behavior, was found dead in his swimming pool. The loss was both personal and professional for Jagger. Jones had been a friend, a bandmate, and one of the architects of the Stones' early sound. His death haunted the group and marked a dark turning point in their journey. It was also a bitter reminder that the very excesses that fueled their music could just as easily destroy them. That same year, Jagger's personal life became equally turbulent. He embarked on a passionate but volatile affair with American model and singer Marsha Hunt. Their relationship was fiery and complicated, culminating in the birth of their daughter, Karis, in 1970. Yet, despite the intimacy of their connection, Jagger became increasingly detached, unable, or perhaps unwilling, to reconcile the demands of fatherhood with the whirlwind of his rock star lifestyle. Hunt would later recall how Jagger sent flowers and a car for Karis's birth, but wasn't present, reflecting the emotional distance that became a pattern in his relationships. This absent fatherhood became a thread that ran through much of Jagger's life, casting a shadow over his relationships with his many children. In 1971, Jagger married Bianca Perez Mora Macias, a stunning Nicaraguan socialite and activist. Their wedding in Saint-Tropez was one of the most glamorous events of the decade, attended by the global elite. Yet, behind the glittering facade, the marriage was fraught with infidelity, power struggles, and emotional detachment. Bianca, who later became a renowned human rights advocate, would admit that their relationship was essentially over on their wedding day. The fairy tale collapsed under the weight of Jagger's relentless pursuit of new pleasures and the suffocating scrutiny of the tabloids. By 1977, Jagger had begun a highly publicized affair with model Jerry Hall, a Texan beauty who became his partner for over 2 decades. Together, they had 4 children and, for a time, seemed to cultivate a semblance of domestic bliss. They shared mansions, private jets, and the high life, but Jagger's restless spirit couldn't be tamed. The couple's relationship weathered numerous storms, including a devastating loss in 1985 when one of the twins Hall was carrying died in utero. It was a deeply personal tragedy that the public barely glimpsed, buried beneath the headlines about Jagger's latest escapades. Eventually, even Jerry Hall reached her breaking point. In 1999, after discovering that Jagger had fathered a child with Brazilian model Luciana Morad, Hall ended their relationship for good. She later admitted that she had tolerated his countless affairs, believing that their family life was strong enough to survive them. But the ultimate betrayal was too much. Once again, Jagger found himself alone, a pattern of self-sabotage that mirrored the instability he had created around him. But it wasn't just his personal life that bore the weight of his contradictions. Professionally, Jagger navigated a minefield of pressures. As the face of the Rolling Stones, he was expected to be ageless, tireless, endlessly provocative. The 1970s saw the Stones produce some of their most acclaimed work: Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, and Some Girls. Records that cemented their reputation as the world's greatest rock and roll band. Jagger's lyrical genius and stagecraft became the blueprint for countless artists who followed. Yet even as he reveled in the adulation of millions, he privately confessed fears of becoming a caricature of himself. In a candid moment in the mid-1970s, he famously quipped that he'd rather be dead than sing Satisfaction at 45, a statement that revealed the heavy burden of maintaining the image of eternal youth and rebellion. The creative tensions within the band also took their toll. Jagger's relationship with Keith Richards, once a brotherhood forged in musical alchemy, grew strained as egos clashed and lifestyles diverged. Richards mocked Jagger's attempts at solo projects, calling him Her Majesty, and accusing him of losing touch with his roots. For Jagger, the artistic pressures were relentless. Keep the band relevant, maintain the machine, and fight the ever-creeping sense that they were becoming nostalgia acts. But Jagger did keep singing and performing and reinventing. He led the Stones through the changing landscapes of music, culture, and technology, playing over 2,000 shows and adapting their sound to new generations. The very thing that made him a global icon, his relentless drive, also became his curse. As he aged, the rock star persona clung to him like a second skin, impossible to shed. In interviews, he would occasionally let slip the exhaustion and loneliness that accompanied his fame. He once joked that being a sex symbol in his 70s was hilarious, yet also confessed that fame made him feel helpless, useless, and irrelevant. In 2014, Jagger faced one of his deepest personal tragedies when his longtime partner, fashion designer Lorenz Scott, died by suicide. The news shocked the world, but for Jagger, it was a crushing blow that left him grief-stricken and searching for answers. He described being devastated and struggling to understand how someone he loved so dearly could end her life in such a way. The Stones postponed their tour dates, giving Jagger space to grieve. For once, the rock star's armor cracked, revealing the vulnerable man beneath the legend. His sorrow was compounded in 2021 when the Stones lost their beloved drummer, Charlie Watts, after decades of friendship and music-making. On stage at their first show without Charlie, Jagger broke down in tears, dedicating the performance to Our Lovely Charlie, his voice heavy with emotion. It was a rare glimpse of the deep bonds that, despite all the chaos, still anchored his life. Yet, through all the heartbreak, loss, and regrets, Jagger has remained a survivor. In 2023, at the age of 80, he released Hackney Diamonds, the Rolling Stones' first album of new material in 18 years. It was more than a record. It was a declaration that he wasn't done yet, that the music still pulsed through his veins, that the stage still called him home. The album was raw, energetic, defiant, a sonic testament that even after 6 decades, the fire still burned. Mick Jagger's life is a symphony of triumphs and tragedies. He is a man who scaled the heights of fame, only to discover that the view from the top can be cold and lonely. His story is not just one of artistic brilliance and cultural influence, but of the emotional cost of living in the glare of the spotlight, of losing friends, lovers, and even pieces of himself along the way. He once said he made music for a laugh, but perhaps, more than anything, he made music to survive, to make sense of a life that was often anything but. As the lights dim and the crowds fade, Mick Jagger remains on stage, dancing defiantly into the night. A man who, even at 80, refuses to let the tragedies of his past define him. Only the music. Steve Perry's life is a ballad written in heartbreak.
The feeling just got very clear to me that I need to just stop.
Perseverance and echoing silence. A man whose voice once defined a generation, only to vanish in the prime of his fame, leaving millions wondering, why did he walk away? To understand Steve Perry is to understand the weight of a gift too great to carry lightly. Born Stephen Ray Perry on January 22, 1949, in Hanford, California, he was the only child of Portuguese-American parents. His father, Ray, was a singer and co-owner of a local radio station. As a young boy, Steve would sit beside the transmitter, mesmerized by the voices pouring out of the speakers. But the innocence of that world shattered when Steve was just 8 years old. His parents divorced, a quiet explosion that left a fault line in his heart that never fully healed. His mother raised him alone, and though she loved him fiercely, the absence of his father left Steve aching for approval, structure, and identity. Music filled the vacuum. Influenced by Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye, and Jackie Wilson, Perry didn't just sing, he emoted. Every note was a cry, a reach, a prayer. In his teens, he joined garage bands, lugged gear through the rain, and sang in roadhouses for gas money and hope. Still, it wasn't easy. For nearly a decade, Perry flirted with failure. Bands came and went. Record deals vanished as fast as they were offered. At one point, disillusioned and broke, he nearly quit for good. But destiny had other plans. In 1977, the call came. Journey, a prog rock band with limited commercial success, Neil Schon, the band's guitarist, had heard Perry's demo through their manager. At first, the band hesitated. Perry was soulful, vulnerable, almost too sensitive for a hard rock act. But then came the audition. Steve opened his mouth, and out came that voice, crystalline, pleading, thunderous. The band didn't just hear him. They felt him. And just like that, the soft-spoken kid from Hanford was fronting one of America's most iconic bands. Overnight, Journey's sound transformed. Perry brought melody to their muscle, emotion to their edge. His arrival reshaped everything. With him, they released Infinity, 1978, Evolution, 1979, and Departure, 1980. Records that surged with power ballads and radio-ready rockers. Then came Escape, 1981, the album that broke them into the stratosphere. Don't Stop Believin', Open Arms, and Who's Crying Now weren't just hits. They were generational tattoos. They played at proms, funerals, weddings, and stadiums. Steve's voice soared above them all, hopeful, haunting, and unmistakable. But as Journey climbed, Perry began to fall. Behind the arena lights was a man crumbling under pressure. Perry was a perfectionist, obsessed with pitch, terrified of failure, consumed by the fear of losing the very gift that made him famous. Singing wasn't just talent, it was war. His vocal cords were golden but fragile, and he treated them like priceless instruments. Before shows, he'd go silent to conserve strength. He was often alone, isolated from the band, who were more easygoing and jam-oriented. They loved him, but they didn't always understand him. The strain of constant touring, over 200 shows some years, ground him down. Perry battled chronic sinus infections, anxiety, and vocal fatigue. There were nights when he sang through searing pain, bolstered only by adrenaline and corticosteroid injections. He described it later as standing on a ledge, knowing one wrong step, one vocal collapse, could end everything. And then, tragedy struck. In 1985, during the recording of Raised on Radio, Steve's mother Mary became gravely ill. The woman who had stood by him through every broken demo and failed band, the woman who believed in him when no one else did, was dying of a rare neurological disease. Perry was torn between duty and devotion. He left the studio, flew home to be by her side, and watched her slip away. She died in his arms. Though he returned to finish the album, he was a changed man. His grief was not loud, it was paralyzing. On tour, he went through the motions, but the joy was gone. At the final show in Alaska, he stepped off stage and knew, deep in his soul, that it was over. He walked away from Journey, not with fanfare, not with bitterness, just silence. From 1987 onward, Steve Perry disappeared. For years, he lived in near-complete anonymity. No new music, no interviews, no appearances. Rumors swirled. Vocal damage, depression, addiction. None of it was true. The real reason, he was broken. Not just emotionally, spiritually. He had lost his muse. The voice that once gave him everything had become a prison. I was burned out, he admitted years later. I didn't want to do it anymore. I couldn't. In 1994, he tried to return with a solo album, For the Love of Strange Medicine. It had modest success, a tour, a few singles, but the fire wasn't there. In 1996, Journey reunited to record Trial by Fire. The chemistry was still alive. The band was ready to tour. Then, fate dealt another blow. Perry injured his hip while hiking in Hawaii. Doctors told him surgery was urgent, but Perry hesitated, scared of anesthesia, scared of complication. The band, under pressure, issued an ultimatum. Fix the hip or step aside. He stepped aside. To lose his voice was one thing. To lose his band, his brothers, his legacy, was another. Journey replaced him. The show went on. And Steve Perry? He vanished once more. Years passed. Fans assumed he was retired, content, or perhaps lost for good. But behind the scenes, Steve Perry was enduring another heartbreak, one that would finally break through his silence. In 2011, he met Kelly Nash, a psychologist and cancer survivor. They fell in love. She was the first person in decades to reach him emotionally, to crack the armor he had built around himself. For the first time since his mother's death, he allowed himself to feel again. But in a cruel twist, Kelly's cancer returned. Perry stood by her through every chemo session, every scan, every tear. She passed away in December 2012. Devastated, he retreated once more. but not entirely. Before she died, Kelly made him promise, "Don't hide again. Don't let grief silence your soul." And this time, he listened. In 2018, after 24 years of silence, Steve Perry released Traces, a solo album born not from fame, but from mourning. It was a love letter to Kelly, to his mother, to everything he had lost. Songs like No Erasing and We're Still Here pulsed with quiet strength, whispered regrets, and the ache of a man learning to feel again. It wasn't a comeback, it was a resurrection. He didn't tour, he didn't shout, he simply released it and let the music speak. Today, Steve Perry lives a quiet life. He avoids the spotlight. He's cordial with Journey, but a reunion is unlikely. His voice, once earth-shaking, is gentler now, weathered by time, loss, and silence. And yet, it still carries something few singers ever possess: honesty. Steve Perry's life is a tragic triumph. He chased the dream, caught it, and lost himself inside it. He loved, he broke, he disappeared, and somehow he returned, not as a rock god, but as a man. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all, because the voice never truly left. It just needed to find its way home. The lights dim. A single spotlight finds Robert Plant on stage, larger than life. The roar of the crowd washes over him like waves against a rock, and yet in that moment his eyes hold a distant sadness, invisible to the audience. To the fans, he is a god of rock and roll, voice soaring like a fierce golden bird. But beneath the swagger and the screaming guitars, Robert carries ghosts, a silent memory of a son lost, a brother's laughter forever cut off, and a soul worn thin from decades of surviving when others could not. This is the story of a legend who conquered the world with song, and of the deep, private sorrows that never left him. He was born Robert Anthony Plant in 1948, in the industrial town of West Bromwich, a spare, lively boy among cinder blocks and northern coal dust. Even as a child, he was drawn to music. Elvis Presley on the family radio, the Beatles on TV, and the whispered poems of old folk ballads. By 16, he had dropped out of school to chase a different future. The thick ledgers of his father's garage were replaced with the weight of a microphone. He learned to sing in small local pubs and jazz clubs, skinning his voice on the rough edges of blues and R&B, shaking off shy boyhood for something wilder. In those dim basement venues, Robert's voice became a force beyond his years. A bit of Lancashire cheek, a pinch of outlaw fire, hinting already at the power that would shake stadiums one day. Backstage dreams turned reality in the summer of 1968 when a scruffy-suited guitarist named Jimmy Page invited Robert to join a new band. The Yardbirds had splintered, and Page, seeing something wild in Plant's golden eyes, asked him to sing. Robert answered the call. Along with drummer John Bonham, whom he had known from an earlier group called the Band of Joy, and bassist John Paul Jones, they lit the fuse of what would become Led Zeppelin. It all happened in a whirlwind. One moment Robert was a local club singer, the next he was part of rock history. Led Zeppelin released its debut album in January 1969, and it was as if the sky itself opened to their sound. Robert's voice, raw, high, and full-throated, became the thunder that carried their young, unfettered dreams.
Led Zeppelin stormed into the 1970s as more phenomenon than band. Stadiums packed beyond capacity, fans screaming every lyric, and floods of cameras capturing every wild gesture. Robert Plant had become the golden-throated frontman of a musical armada. One after another, the albums he recorded with his band, Led Zeppelin 1, 2, 3, and 4, shattered sales records. Stairway to Heaven emerged in 1971 as an epic anthem played on repeat around the world. On stage, he danced with ferocious joy, twirling a microphone like a sword, his voice straining to reach the heavens. Yet the success hid its own burdens. Relentless touring crisscrossing the globe, days of delirium and nights of exhaustion. Between the pyrotechnics and the adulation, Robert was already learning that fame was a double-edged sword, thrilling to wield but heavy to carry. All the while, he had another life away from the spotlight, a homebound life. In late 1968, he married Maureen Wilson, the girl from the neighborhood who had stuck by him since their school days. Just 2 weeks after their wedding in a crowded Birmingham hall, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Carmen. A few years later came a second child, a son named Carrick Pendragon. For Robert, fatherhood brought something he had never fully tasted on stage. Tenderness, responsibility, a love not measured in decibels. He adored those children, winding Carmen's hair around his finger and singing her to sleep, whispering wonderings about the stars to little Carrick as he learned to toddle. But Led Zeppelin's machine showed no mercy. While Robert was out conquering the world, the late nights and jet lag tore at his family. He often found himself torn between two worlds, one that demanded every ounce of his voice and energy, and another that asked only that he simply be home for bedtime stories. That summer was one like any other. Long drives under the Mediterranean sun, laughter and music playing on the car radio. But fate had another plan. In August 1975, while vacationing on a rocky Greek hillside, Robert's family car careened out of control. In an instant, the bright air was replaced by searing pain. Metal crumpled, glass shattered. Robert and Maureen and their two small children were thrown into chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, but Robert could only hear the thud of his own pounding heart. When he came to in the hospital, it was to a scene from a nightmare. Maureen's body lay broken on a stretcher, her skull and pelvis fractured, one leg in pieces, her temperature dangerously low. The doctors scrambled to save her. Urgent blood transfusions kept her alive. Robert's arms and legs were also bandaged. He could barely feel them through the agony. For a while, it felt like one long, endless scream of suffering. He could still draw a crowd, but the eyes of Robert Plant were different now. Kinder and tired, aware of how precious life could be. He carried guilt like a secret companion. Guilt that he had left his son too often. Guilt that the music they made together was now a closed chapter. Guilt that he was alive when others were not. Over the years, Robert would slowly emerge from the shadows of his past. He released album after album, sometimes rock, sometimes folk, always searching for peace. In 1993, he even co-wrote a song called I Believe for his album Fate of Nations, a further tribute to his lost Carrick. He rarely touched the old Led Zeppelin anthems at first, as if afraid that reliving those moments would crack open old wounds again. But the world was not done with Robert Plant. Each new performance reminded people that, scars and all, he was still vital and the same powerhouse vocalist at heart. He formed new bands, collaborated with others, from American bluegrass with Alison Krauss to world fusion projects, anything to expand beyond the name he had grown too large under. Yet even as he sang to crowds as big as ever, a quiet tension hummed beneath the surface. Every footstep was followed by the echoes of a path he once walked, and every cheer reminded him of those who could no longer join in. Today, Robert Plant still stands on stages around the world, but the stories he sings have changed. There's a wrinkle in his laughter and a distant gleam in his eyes that weren't there in his youth. He once confessed that every now and then he still hears Carrick's voice. If not in a dream, then in a lyric or a sunrise. His legacy is enormous. The rock world venerates his name. But the man himself knows what they do not see, the hollow in his heart that success could not fill. He carries a weight that no audience can lift. Memories of a child who should have grown old, a bandmate taken too early, and a life that spun so far beyond the ordinary that it broke more than it built. Even as he joins in the modern world, raising grandchildren, tending quiet passions, and occasionally chuckling at life's absurdities, the scars remain. Whenever the guitar echo fades and silence takes him, Robert is left alone with the memories of innocence lost. In the end, he still wonders sometimes about the boy he lost, the friends he said goodbye to, and the decades that followed where nothing would ever sound quite the same. And yet he sings on because this is his story now, the only way he knows to keep hope alive in the face of unimaginable sorrow.
He was the voice that launched 1,000 anthems. The roar behind Jukebox Hero, the soul in I Want to Know What Love Is, the raw power that filled arenas across the world. Lou Gramm wasn't just a rock singer. He was the sound of desire, heartbreak, and rebellion packed into 3-minute masterpieces that defined a generation. But behind the voice that conquered the world was a man slowly being conquered by fame, addiction, and an invisible enemy inside his own skull. His was a life of soaring highs and devastating lows, a journey that tested his body, his spirit, and ultimately, his very identity as an artist and a man. Lou Gramm's story reads like a rock opera, a small-town singer who found himself catapulted into arenas full of screaming fans, only to confront demons that almost silenced his voice forever. As Foreigner's impassioned frontman, Gramm belted out classics. Feels Like the First Time, Hot-Blooded, Jukebox Hero, and the chart-topping ballad I Want to Know What Love Is, helping the band sell over 70 million records worldwide. From the outside, it was glory, but Gramm's life was quietly unraveling. Beneath the glitz, he was locked in creative battles, sliding into addiction, and ultimately facing a benign brain tumor that nearly cost him everything. This is a chronicle of Gramm's rise and heartbreaking fall, where each arena anthem carried a hidden weight of loss, identity struggle, and the hard-won resilience that followed. His journey can be sketched in milestones, 1976 to 1985. Lou Gramm, born Louis Grammatico, flew from Rochester to New York and won the lead singer spot in Mick Jones's new band, initially called Trigger, later renamed Foreigner. Together they forged smash hits and arena anthems. Foreigner's first 8 singles all landed in the Billboard Top 20. Albums like 1981, produced arena anthems Urgent and Jukebox Hero, and Gramm co-wrote power ballads Waiting for a Girl Like You and I Want to Know What Love Is, the latter a #1 hit around the globe. Gramm's raw, soulful voice became the band's trademark, making him one of rock's most recognizable vocalists of the era. Mid-1980s, clash of creatives. As Foreigner's fame exploded, a bitter creative rift grew. Jones pushed the band toward slick, synthesizer-driven pop, while Gramm longed to keep their sound gritty and guitar-based. This volatile chemistry eventually became unbearable. Gramm later admitted that after 12 years he felt stifled creatively. Their musical differences dragged out projects. Agent Provocateur took 3 years to make, and in 1990, Gramm left Foreigner rather than surrender his artistic identity. 1987 to 1990, solo struggle. Before his first exit, Gramm launched a solo career. In January 1987, he released Ready or Not, an album that included the top 5 single Midnight Blue. The record's success hinted at new beginnings, but Gramm found it hard to replicate Foreigner's massive popularity. Critics and fans were less enraptured with his solo work, partly because the trappings of fame and his growing drug addiction were pulling him off course. He later formed the group Shadow King, 1991, and scored a hit on the Lost Boys soundtrack. But by 1992, Gramm felt out of place in rock stardom. 1990s, downward turn and renewal. Gramm's life careened into darkness. By the early 1990s, he was battling heavy substance abuse. As he later admitted, about a dozen years of drugs and alcohol. The rock and roll lifestyle had its grip on him, and he was on a dangerous course. As he told Christian TV, he needed it more than it needed him, and finally prayed for release. That desperate night, after a sold-out show at Madison Square Garden, he fell to his knees and asked God to take this plague away. Immediately, he checked into Hazelden Rehab, calling the 30 days there the best 30 days of my life. Emerging clean and sober, Gramm found a new identity. He became a born-again Christian, even vowing to stop the cocaine and partying, to the astonishment of bandmates who famously asked, "What in the world's wrong with you?" when he declined their usual drug offers. This spiritual rebirth lifted Gramm from his abyss. But new trials lay ahead. 1997. Near-death crisis. Just as Gramm was rebuilding, calamity struck. In early 1997, on the eve of a Japan tour, he was racked by blinding headaches and short-term memory loss. Doctors discovered a rare craniopharyngioma tumor the size of an egg pressing on his brain. Although the tumor was benign, it was deeply entwined with his pituitary gland and optic nerves. Surgeons warned the verdict plainly. Gramm had been sent home and told I was going to die. The diagnosis felt like a literal death sentence. As Gramm later wrote in his memoir, "I had just been given a death sentence at the ripe old age of 46. Convinced that he had nearly 47 years of life left, the news of an inoperable tumor sent him into shock. The band even quietly prepared for a worst case, but Gramm refused to accept defeat. Through pure coincidence, he saw a TV program about a specialized surgeon, Dr. Peter Black, who tackled such cases. Within hours, he was on a plane to Boston, and days later, he endured a 19-hour brain operation, one of the longest such surgeries ever performed on a rock star. 1997 to 1998. Battered return. Gramm survived, but at great cost. The tumor removal left his pituitary badly damaged. Recovery meant massive doses of steroids to keep him alive, doses that doubled his body weight in 6 months. By 1 year out, the man who had weighed 145 pounds was wearing size 42 pants, his entire wardrobe discarded. Physically transformed and exhausted, Gramm was allowed to return to the stage after just a few months, against doctors' orders, to fulfill Foreigner's commitments. But he was not the same. He could no longer sprint across the stage. He had to plant himself at a microphone stand and rely on cheat sheets taped to the floor to remember lyrics. In one tour manager's words, Gramm did the shows out of loyalty, but he couldn't remember any of the words without help. The powerful singer was now frail, testing the limits of the promise he made to himself, to stay alive. Despite the toll, Gramm's spirit endured. He spent months rebuilding his health, enduring therapy for vision and stamina. When his voice did return, it was a quieter victory. Gramm later acknowledged that his singing had permanently changed. Each note now carried the weight of his survival. He was a man transformed, still clutching the microphone as proof of life. 2000s to 2010. Redemption and legacy. In the years after, Gramm slowly found peace. He officially parted ways with Foreigner for good in 2003, by which time the rock star lifestyle no longer held any appeal. He turned that chapter of his life into art and faith. In 2009, he released a Christian rock album with the Lou Gramm Band, fulfilling a promise made in sobriety. He spent time on small tours, often with his own brother in the band, and focused on family. He now delights in the company of his 5 children. Gramm also put pen to paper. In 2013, he published his autobiography, Jukebox Hero: My 5 Decades in Rock and Roll, laying bare the dark nights that followed the spotlight. That year, he and Mick Jones even reconciled briefly on stage at the Songwriters Hall of Fame dinner, the first time they'd spoken in a decade, after both were inducted together. Gramm later quipped that Hall of Fame politics had kept Foreigner out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but he had long since learned to live with it. By the late 2000s and 10s, he was content to step away from incessant touring, retiring from the road in 2018, while continuing to write and occasionally perform. Even now, he still hops on stage with his Lou Gramm All-Stars, billed as the original voice of Foreigner, proving that resilience. Throughout, the emotional toll of Gramm's journey has been enormous. He lost creative partnerships, battled inner demons, and faced the very real possibility that his greatest gift, his voice, might be snatched away. At times, he seemed broken, the weight of survival written on his face, the silence of uncertainty in his eyes. Yet he also found redemption, first in salvation from addiction, then in survival of illness, and finally in finding new purpose in music and faith. Gramm himself acknowledged the irony of it all, how songs about a jukebox hero came to mirror his own struggles with fame and identity. Today, Lou Gramm stands as a survivor of rock's darkest curses. His howl in Hot-Blooded still thrills fans, but behind it lies the tale of a man who was nearly silenced. Through every high note and every falter, Gramm's humanity shines through. His life reminds us that every stadium anthem can have a hidden coda of pain, and every legend has a private struggle. Gramm turned his heartbreak and nightmares into perseverance, emerging not as a fallen idol, but a hero tempered by fire. In the end, the jukebox hero's legacy is as much about courage and resilience as it is about rock and roll, a testament to a voice that refused to be lost in the silence. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on to never miss a video.